Right, well, let's kick off then. Welcome to Thomas. Adam, he's one of mine. So welcome, Adam. So we've got a fairly full agenda tonight, I think. I'll just run through what there is briefly. We've got my little bit here, then Gary's going to tell us what's new. Then Christian's going to run us through a couple of new MonkeyBread functions, which are in the latest release. I'm sure everyone has probably heard by now that we sadly lost Don Collier fairly recently. Thank you, John, for letting me know. So we'll have a little session where if anyone wants to say something, they can, just to remember Don. And then Damon's going to do the first of his UX Matters presentations, first of 3. And then Wim's going to talk about his new idea for server backups. And then we'll all descend into the bar. So looking forward to all of it, I think. I think there should be some really interesting stuff there. So without any further ado, Gary, do you want to kick off with the What's New section?
Yeah, I will do that. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Hopefully it will go forward. Thank you. Good. There was a reasonable amount in the news over the last couple of months, but I picked out just a collection of stuff. One thing I wanted to highlight is I get a lot of the source from 2 or 3 blogs that I follow, and a couple of people that post regularly on various LinkedIn and other sources. So it's only a snippet of the news. It's the things that I've noticed that I thought was worthwhile conversation. So if ever you guys think, right, there's something I want brought up in the news, please let us know before the next session and I'll include it, and then we'll go over that stuff. The good point of the news is if you bring this up here, I can tell you what happens usually in the virtual bar later is the fact that after all the sessions, everyone's talking about the stuff that's been mentioned through the sessions and the news. So if there's a place to discuss something, it's worthwhile bringing it up. So one thing is, are we on M1? We are now. It took a while, but we're there. This is a site I use regularly, is applesiliconready.com. It has every application there. So if ever you're running on an M1 Mac, which I'm privileged to say that I am, I'm running on an M1 at the moment. I was checking there and I thought I'd have a look at it. Apparently Rosetta is not brilliant in Rosetta 2 for FileMaker 19. It wasn't, but now they moved to M1 native. It's good. You can see when it was posted, 24th of June. So a lot of you are saying, yeah, well, fine, it worked okay for me under Rosetta, it was fine. Do I need to move? There are reasons why you should, and there's also a reason why you shouldn't. So I wanted to go over the additional stuff. This was a brilliant post, I thought, from PK Information, which was the Claris Workarounds from 19.3.1. And I know there's been a further update, but the point is it makes you realise what was wrong with this release when it came out. It was quite a bit wrong. And so from that side of it, I wanted to go over a couple of key things that was mentioned on here. So these are the things that they mentioned that were potential pitfalls and problems with the upgrade. So there's various options here, and I felt the most compelling one was database not opening on Windows, which I thought was hilarious because I read the post from the guys that wrote this, and they said they'd done some testing on it, and they said if you attempt to open the database around about 10 times, it'll eventually open. So I see that as quite as a major bug due to the fact that no one, unless you've got all the time in the world to open your databases, then you'll be there for a while trying to open them. And with us, we're hosting hundreds of databases, so it's the point of I couldn't put that onto my users at all, so they'd just be there forever trying to open stuff. The base elements plugin was sold very, very quickly, but it's a really good site. It's got a lot of workarounds to how you can then get around stuff. And I quite like this sort of graphic they put at the end of it is should you upgrade, which I thought was a really nicely put together thing. So it says, do you use the M1 chip? Yes, you do. Well, are you comfortable implementing the workarounds? Because if you're not, don't upgrade. It's that simple. If you're on Windows, do you have PDFs in the container field? Because that's something that just didn't work. So from that side of view, there was a few issues that they need to sort out as far as that's concerned. But quite a lot of these are being fixed now, but it's worthwhile. It's a worthwhile read because if there's anything that's compelling in your solutions, then I'd consider whether or not you should upgrade or not. If you're on M1 already, though, you have no option. You should really upgrade. And then it comes down to the reasons why you should upgrade. So why should you buy an M1 and why should you upgrade? This is something that's posted online about performance between the M1 and an Intel Xeon. And from my point of view, I've noticed a massive difference in the stuff I'm doing in FileMaker. When the native version came out, it was a lot quicker, hell of a lot faster. So there are some compelling reasons to do this, certainly if you're using server. So if you're running server on a Mac and you can get a Mac Mini and you can put the server on that, that's fine. It will work. It will work well now. But obviously you've got the Linux client as well. So, and I read an article that someone's put Linux on an M1 now. So now I'm looking at it thinking, I don't know if that's supported, but it certainly can run. So there's people running Linux on an M1 now as well. Similar sort of response as well you get from the Silicon versus Intel on the actual Pro side as well as the server. So it's a much faster machine when you're running that. And this thing I wanted to mention as well, 24U, they did a bench test, really good site. Have a look. The 2 URLs at the bottom. But the lab test they did, they ran through various reasons what to do, and they even grabbed an old Intel Mac Pro, and they were testing that compared to what the current M1's doing. And it was quite enlightening that certain things on the Mac Pro were still running faster than the M1. Most things weren't, I might add, but there were some things on there that weren't, that were quicker on the actual Intel platform. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to download a file and then do these bench tests on your infrastructure they want. They've done their test of, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 scenarios. They want all of us to get together to do it. So it's something I'm looking at of putting onto our solutions, our builds, and then collectively sharing that information to see whether or not we've got speed performances in certain areas. It'll certainly give you an idea of, if I do lots of sorts or lots of finds, then moving to M1 would be a better way, or sticking with the Intel platform may be a better way. And also picking the version that you're running, because if we get a cross-section of people running servers on Linux, Windows, and Mac, we might see certain operating systems are better than others. So that was something I spotted for news so far. The other thing I noticed is Soliant did a brilliant post. I thought, I'm into barcodes and bits and pieces, but this was updated, but it got mentioned again, but there's additional barcodes supported now. The PGF 417, ITF 14, Aztec, and Data Matrix is now supported natively in FileMaker, which is really good. I don't know how many of you get involved in barcodes. I do a lot of work in that. So, and we get barcodes of every format possible. We import goods all over the world. So you never know the format it comes in, but it's just to mention that there's a good post there on Soliant's website, which basically gives you, it's the FileMaker 18, but it's been updated for 19, so it gives you all the options of the extra barcodes you can use in there now. And the nice thing in that post is there's an add-on to that post at the bottom of it. It's about, and a lot of you who work in this sort of field would know how to do this, but it's you can then use Java to generate the barcode on the fly for you instead of doing something else as well. So I always used to do it with various fonts you used to download in the old days and put on the machines and then get them to run. So now you can just use JavaScript, web viewer, and various ways of encoding that to then get the barcode generated on the fly in FileMaker natively, which is really cool. Another thing that I hadn't really, some of you may know this, some wouldn't, but I thought this is a really good article that I found, and it's something that is using the following 4 script functions and it was basically put together to create custom headers on CSVs when you export them. So if you export that, you don't get the headers. But it was a really good post. I thought it's certainly something that we could be looking at, because we get always the request when we're writing reports, oh, I want this field header on it. And it's like, it's a quick way of doing it. I think it's a neat trick of doing it. It's something we're going to look into. It's that thing as if you're then going, I don't know, a related data set, you've got the related field table name and so forth, and you've got to strip the thing out. Or in a CSV format, you don't even get that anyhow. You just get the actual data. So it's a way of adding that to the header record. Don't know if it's just for anyone. It's something I spotted that I thought was useful for us. And the final thing I wanted to mention was FM Sunday, which I'm saying this is a plug for Penny, but more the point that she spent a long time customizing this. Is now fully supported in 19. It gives you all the information that you could throw a stick at to know about FileMaker training. It gives you every piece of data, every reference document. And she asked me to put the last thing. She's fully updated for 19, and in her eyes, she's used it on an iPhone and iPad, and she's just always carrying it around with her. It's totally free to download. She offers it for no financial benefit. She does it just for the love of FileMaker. So, but it's a useful tool that you've got every single reference link. So every question on there, every reference has got their links to the actual websites of where they originated, whether it's the Claris help or various other posts and so forth that give you that information. So if you're interested, even if you're not, just download it and have a look at it, because it's a brilliant reference tool. We use it all the time during work. So it's that thing of, well, can we do this? Can we do that? And you've got that reference in your pocket. It's always available. And then just to mention that all of this will get discussed later, I'm very sure. And anything else that anyone wants to discuss will be in the virtual bar later. So it's a brilliant place to have a bit of a Q&A session. So that's my 5-minute whistle-stop tour of the news that I've found over the last couple of months. So that's it. Cool.
Great. Thank you very much.
Hopefully you all heard, which is good. So.
Thanks very much, Gary. If it's all right, you can send me those links. I can put them up on the website after the meeting.
Yeah,
so people find those very useful.
I'll post them in the chat while the next people are talking anyhow. So I'll pull them up and post them in the chat.
By the way, the chat is available on the website every time we save the chat, and it's on the FMBug website if anyone needs it later. We're now up with Christian. If you're ready, Christian. Or do you need a couple of minutes and you want me to waffle for a couple of minutes? No, you're ready.
No, So, welcome to my live demonstration of a few new features. So, next MBS plugin will ship with a few nice features like custom functions in FileMaker stored in a database and managed with a plugin. Do you see my screen?
Yep, all good.
So we had this idea at the excellent .fmp conference where Philip Puls showed how he does it with doing calculations in a database and then running them. And I thought I could help with a plugin to make this more easy for you guys. So we have a file here with custom functions stored. And there's a name. There are parameters defined with example values. There is a calculation here, which defines what the function does. And we have a few buttons here, so we can format the calculation. We can do a syntax check. We can register it, and we can, of course, try it. So I can here just edit it a little bit. So I format, I try, and it works. So the plugin manages the list of the custom functions, and you can always call them with our new fm.cf command. Pass in the name of the dictionary with your custom functions, so you can have different namespaces. And then the function name and any parameters you need, as many as you want. Now you may ask, why should I do that? And once you register the function with the plugin, you can use them in all your files. So it's not limited to one file. You don't need to have to copy functions from one file to another. We have a flexible number of parameters. Yeah, and you can just load the functions on the server, on the client, even on iOS with the SDK to be usable with the plugin. Let me just show you how this works. So we have here a start script, which creates a named dictionary. A dictionary is a place where we can store values based on a key in memory with an index, so it's very fast. And we walk over the layout, over the records, and register each function. And when we register each function, we put the function code in the dictionary with the name of the function as a key, and include a comment here for the parameters to declare the parameter names. And once I have that, I can use the custom function. And to give you a few examples, I have here a calculation for some mass. I can calculate that. So 5 by 5 is 25. We can use all the FileMaker functions, like here with a substitute. We can also use JSON functions. And we can call other custom functions defined with the plugin, of course. So we can just do here a concat function, which concats the text again. And we even have some special variable names defined for you, like the current function name and the current dictionary. So you can know what your function is. And you can do recursion here by using those names to define which function to call, so you don't need to know how your function is named or where it is stored. So, any questions for that?
Well, I have to say, it looks very versatile, Christian, and very impressive as always. So I'm sure we can find some uses for it.
Yeah, and now let's go a step further. We have that with JavaScript too. So sometimes you have a piece of code which is written in JavaScript already. You want to use it in FileMaker. And we have a way here for you to define a global JavaScript environment with custom functions, fill in data with properties, and use it everywhere. So let's say we have here a concat function again. This time it's defined in JavaScript, and you can run it. And we have our javascript.cf function to call the custom function with the name and pass the values. The values for the FileMaker custom functions are passed in the data type they are. So this works well with numbers, dates, times, containers. And on the FileMaker functions, we detect if the value is a number, and then we pass it as a number to JavaScript and get the result back as number. So we can do here some math and get back this as 25 as a number and not a text. We can also use array functions in JavaScript, like here, split and join, and just do the same as our substitute earlier. You can use the JSON parse function and other JSON things in JavaScript to, well, do whatever you need. And sometimes you may have a little algorithm in JavaScript which does things a little bit quicker than in FileMaker. We can also call existing custom function, existing JavaScript functions, like here our concat function, and do a concat again here. And let's show you how it starts. So we create a new JavaScript environment with a special name JS. And then we register all the functions there by passing in here the function definition to the engine and using the name of the function as the name as before. And then we can just call a function, and we have this JSCF function for you as a convenience, where you don't need to name where it's stored, because it's assumed that it's a global JS JavaScript environment, but you can have many if you want. And so we also have call function with values, which is the same as the CF here, because it takes the values from FileMaker and converts them to JavaScript values and the result back. And there's also the call function, which uses JSON to transport all the values. Okay, any questions for that? You guys seem to be very happy. The other thing I want like to mention is that if you work with FileMaker's custom functions, like you have one, oh, no, let's make a new one. We have this little tools section here in the last plugin release. I hope you found it already. So you can define a custom function, and you can say here, let's say this custom function is A and B, and you can have the plugin check the syntax and execute it. Now you may think about, but I'm testing here. I would like to assign a value to my parameters. And that's what we made with some special commands. So I can define here hello. And here maybe I can call get account name. Now I can execute that. The plugin will assign variables for A and B, and then do the expression here, and you get the result down here. And I hope you found that useful.
I think that's amazing, Christian. I certainly will find that useful.
Yeah, if you like that, you may be happy to find this in a lot of places. Like, let's say you go here, you can just execute something when you type in the calculation for your, in this case, it's a set variable script step. And it will, of course, use your current variables defined and your current record. So you can actually run it with values. By the way, not sure if you noticed, but when I have this little gear button here, I can press the Option key or Alt key on Mac and jump right into the calculation. So little convenience. Let's just make same works with here set. Oh no, again. So I can Alt click here and it will open the calculation directly. So option click the gear. And also a thing I made today. Let's just make just the script a little bit bigger. So we have a long script, and you may use our search function here. So let's say you search for layout. And now I made the little change that you can now press here a turn key, and actually it jumps to the next layout entry. Line 10, let's see, line 32, line 54, line 76. So I can press Command F to jump here on the field and press return. It searches from the current selected line down, then it warps back to the start if needed. That's something we'll get for the next version.
Christian, a quick question on the that execute. Is that in every calculation dialog in the system? I just noticed it's in defined database as well, which is really handy.
Yeah. Here, you can auto enter calculation here. It's already here, so you can test your calculation right where you are. We put it in a lot of dialogues. And actually, we have the plugin look if there are controls left to it. So we make this border here more left or right, depending on how much stuff is here.
That's very nice.
If this box is over any FileMaker existing control and I missed that, I mean, please let me know. Like we have here our display for the current line number and the column number. And this box used to be too wide, so you couldn't use this pop-up menu here. But someone reported it, and I made it a little bit smaller here on the right side.
Christian, awesome feature with the execute. Does that always work on the entire calculation, or can you select a fragment and click execute and have it execute on a fragment of the calculation?
It's not for fragments. Also, I could make something, yeah, maybe, but that sounds complicated.
Well, it's still very cool. You could, build it, check it, and continue to expand it. Very cool.
Yeah, but we'll see. It's often that we make a little feature and then people come with new ideas. Yeah, like we have the search here, which you probably all know about. So people come with ideas to me, and then we'll add more. So let's see. Do you guys have any questions, or maybe show you another example here coming for the next version?
Christian, there's one question that someone has. Does this work on Windows and Mac?
Oh, yeah.
But
always the same question, yeah. Please buy a Mac. It's simply I'm so terrible on Windows. I can't get into the controls on Windows as the same way we go on them on Mac. I'm sorry, this is not my possibility. It's so easy to extend Objective-C classes and just add a new button and intercept a function call, and yeah. On Windows, I haven't been able to get anything to work. I'm so sorry. So we have styles here. So we have a function to take style text in FileMaker and convert it to a JSON representation. So basically, you have for every block of styles, you have a JSON object, and it defines the text and some information, whether it has different styles. And then if it, for example, here has a font definition, or it comes with face definition, it has all those little properties defining exactly which style this is. So this is bold true. And spell checking is not very useful here. But you can convert style text to JSON, then you can use JSON functions to modify it, and you can convert it back to style text in FileMaker. Maybe useful sometimes. Yeah. So another thing is I worked on the RTF code. So we have code to parse RTF and also convert style text to HTML our own way. And the good thing with all the RTF function is that we can now handle style text in a lot of functions on Windows. So the MBS plugin with the new version can now handle things on the clipboard, for example, with style text. That's something a lot of people ask for. Other thing we do is our OCR engine gets an upgrade. So we can now use version 4 or even version 5, which is in development of the Tesseract engine instead of version 3. And to make this easy for you, we made it opt-in. So you keep the old behavior for compatibility, but if you load the OCR engine, the newer library in the plugin, you can use the newer library and get better results. So for a Mac, you could download it from our website, Dialab, or you install it with Homebrew. For Windows, there's an installer available which puts the DLLs into a folder, because that's a few DLLs. And on Linux, it's very easy to just install a package on Ubuntu and just get the required libraries, and then you can just tell the plugin to load it. And once you loaded it, you can just initialize our OCR engine with the right path to the data files, and then pass in some picture from a container or a file and get the text. Oh, that's a typo, but so we have been stuck on version 3 of Tesseract for a long time, and now we can use version 4 and exactly 4.1 and soon 5. So if you have any need for OCR on the device without any cloud services, and it can be used on the server. And by the way, here RTF functions, style text functions, or custom functions can all be used server-side. So there's no web viewer needed for the JavaScript. So, and on the barcode detection, we have the built-in Sing library, and we can now load the setbar library. So we have 2 ways to recognize barcodes, because we run into the issue that the existing library doesn't read all the barcodes, and the new library reads some, the other didn't. But we have barcodes which one of each library can't read, but the other can read. So you can actually use both if you like and get the best results. Any questions on that? So the next version is coming probably next week.
I have a quick question. What's the advantage of your way of reading barcodes rather than just using the built-in way?
Well, with the built-in way, you probably mean the capability on FileMaker Go, correct?
Yes, basically, yeah.
Yeah, but this is provided by the plugin. It can run on a script, so you can have it check on pictures on the server, or so you have a picture, you have a barcode on it, you want to recognize it. It's not for live recognition like in FileMaker Go. It's a different thing.
So Christian, we get all our, for example, a couple of thousand comics get delivered every week to our place, and on the front of that is a barcode. What you're saying, it'll do in effect an OCR of the barcode on the front cover and detect it. Does it matter about the orientation? Because the barcodes are vertical.
Yeah, I think we have something for rotation, but usually you may want to crop the picture, you may want to increase contrast, and you may try different rotations.
Okay, we can have it. That's fine. That's cool. If it pulls it off the image, that's really cool. So
we have this example, like here in Germany, we use payment codes, which are little QR codes printed on invoices to pay the invoice. And if you would get scans from invoices, you could use our barcode functions to read the values from these QR codes. But as with many things, the plugin is there to automate doing something very often. Like our PDF functions. I mean, everyone can just open a PDF in Adobe Reader or in Adobe Acrobat and do things there with the mouse clicks. But if you want to do it automatically to 1,000 PDFs, you may want to use the plugin. So, any other question?
And Christian, I'm not sure. Well, it's not a question because I think I saw on your website that your plugin is already for anyone running a server on Ubuntu. You're already there, right?
Yes, we have the plugin built in a way that it can run both on CentOS and on Ubuntu.
Thank you.
That should be in the README here. That's yeah. So it still works. If you still have a cloud for AWS, may work there. It may work on CentOS 7 in different versions, Ubuntu 18, and you can use the plugin for scheduled scripts, for Perform script on server, for WebDirect, and for data API. Yeah, and we ship, of course, the plugin compatible with Apple's M1 chip for a month, 2. So I wanted to get this update out before people will install the new FileMaker version. So anything else I can show you?
So I had a quick question about the OCR, Christian. How accurate have you been finding that?
That's a good question. I think you may do your own tests and compare to others. In general, it would be good if you know which language it may be. You can do the OCR with different languages and then get a decision. You can even initialize Tesseract 4 with different languages. So you can say, I initialize it with German and English, and then it may recognize both. You may also check the confidence levels and try different languages. In general, you should have 150 dpi picture. And for the recognition, well, it doesn't do handwriting, I think. But this was a commercial engine years ago, which was open sourced, and we picked it up because, well, it's basically free. Yeah,
it's open source, but it's substantially maintained by Google.
Yeah, and it got I think in version 4 it got a new mode for this machine learning way more. But you may test it if you like it, enjoy it.
Ian, have you tested that on any machine learning?
No, I mean the Tesseract engine has a new mode of operation which uses this machine learning. So they train the engine differently, and that seems to be better. But well,
yeah. So to be honest, for this kind of stuff, I've got Tesseract running on a Raspberry Pi, so a Python API sitting in front of that to call Tesseract. That's sort of mostly what I've been doing.
And we have the direct integration into FileMaker here. But of course, we also have the shell function, so you could run Python scripts from the plugin. Different ways to do the same thing. So
yeah, it's great.
Any other question? Any other example you like to see? Or?
Yes, I did put a tri-sider up about this, but I think it's probably a bit late because I don't think many people joined in on it. So I haven't got anything from the website that people have requested. I'd be interested in the curl stuff.
Yeah, we have a lot of things there. What exactly?
It's just that it's always a nightmare to get curl headings in correctly when sending a call to an API.
Oh, yeah. I think I made a blog post about that some time ago to translate the command line options.
Oh, that would be useful. Yeah.
Okay. We also recently got a little function. Yes. So we have a new function for curl here for pre-signed AWS URLs, which may help people who have data in S3 containers. So basically, we have all the functions for that already. So you could calculate it yourself, but this is a convenience function to do it for you. And so you feed it the values, like your access key, region, bucket name, and so on. And it will create you an URL, which is then valid for a given time. And you can use that to load, for example, a document which is stored in S3 into a web viewer and can be viewed for some time. And then the link will invalidate itself. Can be very useful. It's like our other AWS functions here. Basically helps you to set up all the parameters Yeah, it makes here upload and download from S3 easier, and you can also use it for other AWS services as well as for other services with the same API, like here Wasabi or Dell. So, yeah. Okay.
Extremely useful. So yeah, if anyone wants to jump in and make a request of anything they'd like to know more about on Christian's functions, feel free. He's here. He's happy to talk to you, I think. I don't know how many people use MonkeyBread plugin. I think
thousands
have it installed. I don't know if you've got any stats, Christian.
Well, it's used by thousands of FileMaker developers and a lot of computers. It's amazing. I mean, we have big customers like doing vertical solutions, and they may install it themselves on thousands of computers. So
yeah, it's pretty ubiquitous, I think.
Yeah. So thank you for giving me time here.
One quick question on the S3 stuff. Have you tried it with the DigitalOcean equivalent of S3, which I think is supposed to be compatible?
I haven't tried it, but since our functions all take a domain or the identifier, you could just try different identifiers.
I'll give it a try.
Okay, so thank you, and the next one.
Cool, brilliant, superb.
Fantastic, Christian, and nice to see some of it in action, and thank you very much for giving us your time. So hopefully that was popular with lots of other people.
I'm sure if you're sticking around for the virtual bar afterwards, I'm sure everyone's going to be looking at the site going, I wonder how that works. So if you are sticking around, Christian, I think you might get a few questions. So.
Yeah. I'm just having a quick look at the chat. Actually, I think Ara is asking about zones. I think feel free to join in, Ara, if you've got a decent mic. So just jump in and ask your questions. He's saying, can you have zones on an OCR image?
We have the layout auto detect, so it can detect different blocks like columns. Doing that, but otherwise you can of course also define a rectangle to be used for the OCR, so you don't have the whole picture.
Great, thanks, Christian.
I've got one that ties into the OCR stuff. We on our invoices we put a barcode label which goes through a scanner and gets read into our account system. Now the point is some invoices are delivery dockets, so they've got the delivery barcode. So will it read multiple barcodes off of a single document?
Yeah, for the set bar version, you can get several recognized barcodes on one picture. For the thing one, you would have to split the picture in two and scan like the top part and the bottom part. Or
yeah, that is literally what our accounts.
Yeah, that's
vendor
what
said. Our accounts vendor said, yeah, you got to do that. It was like we get thousands of invoices a month. We're not doing that. So,
yeah, but you could try the new functions with set bar, and I think they have no problem finding several barcodes on a page.
Neat. Give it a go. Have a look. Cool. Wonderful. Superb.
And anyone else got any questions that they've immediately got, or do you want to save them from the bar, or do you want to go and have a poke around before you ask Christian some more questions later? No.
All right. Christian's going to be in the bar later anyhow, so that's perfect.
And don't forget to send me your feature requests. Maybe I can implement something.
Cool.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, you're very responsive, Christian. So thank you very much on behalf of the whole community for everything you've done there. And thanks for that talk. Very interesting. And nice to hear from you. And thanks for giving us your time. What's next on the agenda? Next on the agenda is we're doing well, actually. For once, we're ahead of schedule.
We're ahead of schedule for a change. It's not often that happens. That isn't normal. That isn't normal at all.
So
I'll out of New York. I'll try and help you with your scheduling. Just we use the MonkeyBread plugin. There's a ton of bread and butter functions. I think it would take Christian about a 10-hour presentation to cover like half of what the plugin can do. just to fill some time here with hopefully some useful information. I very much like the exposure of the layout ID, which you can hit with an Apple script. That's huge. And then I know Christian's done a bunch of these and covered this previously. For anyone, if there's anyone here who hasn't used the plugin, the variable checking, which I don't think got mentioned, is huge. But I'll give a particular shout out to the go to layout by layout ID, which you can do with an Apple script. Anyway, maybe you're a little closer to being on schedule.
You can also use, I think we have functions in the plugin to get you the ID to layout name and layout name to ID. So you can, at runtime, get the layout name for an ID, and then you just go to layout with that name.
And Christian, one other thing, because there's so much there. The the colorizing of the JSON is, I built a little JSON editing screen, and the ability to take JSON, for instance, from a script, because maybe I want to look at it, debug it, prettify it. But then, that's as far as it goes with the built-in. And you added the ability to colorize the JSON, which is a nice little touch. And also you did it for XML as well. So this is like Tony's favorite MonkeyBread features.
That's what I usually add to all the layouts. If there is some JSON displayed or some XML, we put an autocalc in to colorize it, to format it.
Yeah, it makes it quite simply easier to read.
And there's also a function to add line numbers if you want that.
Yeah, now that one's interesting. Does that write it straight into the text field? I usually do a global field with the line numbers separate to keep the JSON pure. But,
yeah,
it's a cool function. Cool
we add the line numbers in the text, so you would have to keep the original text somewhere, or later use a function to remove the first, maybe 5 characters on the left.
And then the JSON that you showed earlier in the conversation, are you basically importing or somehow tapping into the entire JSON programming environment such that you have access to every single JSON function?
You were talking about the JavaScript functions?
Oh, I'm sorry. I said JSON. I meant to say JavaScript. Yep.
Yeah, well, in JavaScript, you have the built-in JavaScript function, but you don't have the DOM tree like on a website, because there is no website.
So when you say the built-in JavaScript functions, you're referring to not the FileMaker built-in functions, which are like 6 of them or however many there are. You're talking about
those are JSON functions. So the
right,
JavaScript.
So you're talking about the entire JavaScript environment.
Yeah, we have a JavaScript engine there, which has, of course, the usual built-in functions like array functions, like JSON functions, mass functions, string functions, whatever is built into the JavaScript standard.
Okay, that's very cool. Thanks for clarifying.
And you can even add your custom function. You can define a function for JavaScript to evaluate FileMaker expressions, or run SQL queries, or trigger scripts. So yeah, JavaScript can reach to FileMaker. And the evaluate lets you, for example, have a JavaScript which can actually query the field values on your layout by putting the
say
field
that
name.
again.
You can run something in JavaScript which then uses an evaluate function to look back the values on your layout by referencing the fields by name.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right.
So a lot of possibilities, and we just provide you the toolbox, but you have to build something with it.
Very cool.
Very cool. Thank you, Tony, for extending our getting it back on schedule, and for Christian for talking enough.
Might have even talked slowly.
Perfect. Nice one. Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Right. I think we'll move on to the next thing. We had some very sad news, as I mentioned at the beginning, that we've lost Don Collier. He's definitely one of the unique characters in FileMaker. I'll let Gary introduce this.
Yeah, I wanted to put this feature in. I've known Don for a long time. I think I met him first time at a TechNet down at Stockley Park. But I didn't talk to him at that event. And I think it was just before I went to, I think it was my first DevCon. I went to San Diego. And my first introduction with Don was basically I did the normal thing you did at DevCon. Is you turned up. I turned up late because the company wouldn't give me extra days to fly out, so it was all paid for the company. I was privileged enough that it was paid for, but so I flew out, and I think I landed the day before the first session. Got to the hotel, went and registered straight away. Got my lanyard, did the normal thing, stuck the United Kingdom thing to the bottom, and I was just walking past a bar, and all I heard in this big booming voice was English guy, and that was it. And it was just this huge voice came from the bar, and I turned around and was like, okay, fine, because all he'd done, I didn't even know him by reference as far as I was concerned. I'd seen him at, as I say, at a TechNet in Stockley Park. But so I went over and had a chat with him, and I remember sitting there having a chat for hours to Don, and it's such a character. Yeah, it was a big character, but also a big heart as well. So it's sorely missed. He will be. And I remember going several DevCons later, and I remember went shooting with him, and that was fun. And that was him deciding to. Everyone else had this little gun, and they either had a small rifle or a pistol or something like that. And he goes, "No, I'll have the Gatling gun." I remember him just getting this massive Gatling gun out and just shooting this target. But yeah, it will be a big loss. So, but I hope he is happy and well wherever he is now. That's the key thing. So, if anyone else has got anything to say about Don or ever knew him as a character, please use this opportunity. As I say, this is being recorded, it's going out, so it's a little tribute to the man. So.
Yeah, I'd quite like to say something. I mean, it's a fantastic character, a real character, and as you say, Gary, he was very, very friendly, very helpful. The first time I met him was at a TechNet. I don't know if any of you remember them, when they were at some country club near the Thames somewhere. And like you, Gary, I turned up late, and there was a big open window, sort of big screen window, sort of panorama window, and then there was this big guy waving at me like crazy. So he must have worked out I was a developer. I have no idea how, but he beckoned me in, and that was my introduction to Don. And spent many nights since drinking in the bar with him, telling tall tales, listening to his amazing stories. Yeah, an all-round genuinely lovely character, and he could be quite sharp too if necessary.
Yeah.
Which is always nice. So I don't know if anyone knows about his tea company, that he was very into his tea, and he had a tea company. So if anyone has any reminiscences about that, it would be nice to hear. So I'm going to pass this over to others now. Just jump in.
If no one's got anything to say, that's fine.
Well, so I went to the funeral because Don and I had been working quite closely for the last couple of years when he wasn't very well. The first thing is, what was amazing was there was a very large number of kilts in the room, because he was a very proud Scot, and both of his boys, Bruce, who was a FileMaker programmer, and Rory, had done the decent thing and dressed up in a kilt, but so had several of his friends. It was pretty fabulous from that perspective, because he was a very proud Scot. The amazing thing to me was, obviously, we knew him in a particular context, whereas this involved people who knew him in other contexts as well. He was certainly very well loved by his family, but he, as you know, he was somewhat of a conservative politically, which may not be quite where my sympathies lie, but he was very definitely a believer. And had served on the town council in Poole, and every single thing that everybody said about him who had anything to do with the council was positive and glowing, because of all the qualities that made him what we know he was. Somebody who was very sharp, not afraid to speak his mind, wouldn't put up with bullshit, but actually fought for the community that he represented. So that was kind of quite an honour to see that. I did also discover that had he not kind of become ill, he'd already been pre-selected to get a Tory MP candidacy, which I think is pretty impressive as an achievement. Whether or not you agree with the politics, but you know, those are the kinds of things that I think within the FileMaker community, while he was quite loud, he was also quite a personal. He was very careful of his own personal life and didn't necessarily say everything about everything. So it was I felt it was a great honor. I was there because I knew him as a kind of individual, but also representing the community as well. So that was that. The tea shop is thriving. It's in the centre of Poole, or in Parkston. It's called It's Tea, and you can in fact order online because they ship online. They've got like a wholesale business as well. Don had obviously written everything to make the shop work. But I am going to say, so the very interesting thing was, even though his demise wasn't a surprise in that sense, he was surprisingly unprepared for it with some of the stuff that I'm now trying to work out, like not writing down a whole bunch of passwords that are actually quite crucial. And it did make me kind of think maybe we should be resurrecting that whole Plan B thing that was around a while ago, where you kind of pass off to another developer some interesting and useful stuff. So, but maybe that's a discussion for another time. But yeah, a great man, and coped with being a FileMaker developer while being dyslexic as well. So he was always very vocal about how much he hated XML, but that was just because he couldn't. All of the angle brackets just meant he couldn't read it, and that it wasn't that he wasn't intelligent enough to do it; he just couldn't read it because he was dyslexic. So there were a number of phone calls where he'd phone me, having been swearing clearly for 2 hours about why something didn't work, showed me something on his screen, and I'd go, "Yeah, there's a typo there, Don. That's why it's not working." But he just couldn't see it. But equally, you know, it shows that somebody with that can still be a good developer in terms of, you know, that doesn't have to be a disability that holds you back, kind of thing. But obviously, it did give him a few issues. So anyway, there you go.
Thanks, John. Cheers.
I think my story is very similar to what's already been said. Having met him at one of the TechNet events, he was one of the first people that I came across, along with Chris Manton, who we've sadly lost as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, just how outspoken he was, never afraid to raise an issue that he wasn't happy with or didn't agree with in a room full of people. And you know, he did stand up for us as a group, you know, wanting things to be better, not just from Claris stroke FileMaker, but also from us as a collective as well. And you know, he will be sorely missed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Move on. So, Damon, are you ready?
Yep. Hopefully the demo gods are with me, because I haven't tested this. But
they will be. They'll be fine. So. All right, all yours, mate.
Okay, so your entire screen. So let's go with screen 1 and share.
Perfect.
And we're there. Okay, so I'll start off by apologizing because while this is down as being UX Matters, the next 2 sessions are going to go more into user experience than what I'm doing tonight. Tonight is more about a data modeling session, which will end with me talking about going from a prototype into developing something that will be a user workflow. And so at that point, that's when the user experience stuff will come in. But tonight is more just a presentation to look at what the party model is, So apologies if you do know what the party model is, and I'll be explaining stuff that you already know. And we're going to go and look at some ERDs at the end of this, and then to look at the prototype after that. So the party model it's a way of working with organizations and contacts where it can be really flexible, and it removes redundancy of having, say, an organization having a record in the system as a supplier and also as a customer. And for contacts, you can have them running in various roles simultaneously or over time. So you can then see like a history of what a person has done working for various companies, or if they're working as a contractor, working with multiple companies at the same time. It allows addresses and contact mechanisms. I'm not really comfortable with contact mechanisms, but that's what this book, and I haven't shown you these books, so apologies for that. I'll show you them afterwards. There are two books called the Data Model Resource Book by someone called Len Silverstone, and he talks about things being contact mechanisms. So I'm just using his nomenclature for that on this presentation. So it allows addresses and contact mechanisms to be used. So say that you've got a building where you've got businesses and residential in the same building, then you can just have one address record and you can use it for the contacts, for personal. You can use it as a business address, and you can also use it as an address for someone working within a role at a business, which I'll come on to later on. And as I've said, it gives you a rich history of information on organizations and contacts over time. So the people working for one single business or organization over a period of time, or what a contact has done if they've moved from business to business and they continue working with the company who's using your system. So what is a party model? Well, essentially it just breaks down into being 4 different things. So we have parties, roles, addresses, and then the contact mechanisms. And there are 2 types of parties, one being an organization, one being a contact. And there are then 3 types of roles. So a party role is where an organization can play a role for another organization, or it's for a contact to play a role to an organization or to other contacts. And then declarative roles are where a role is played by an organization or a contact within the context of the business using the system as a whole. And I'll come on to that in a minute. And contextual roles are roles that are played by an organization or a contact in the context of another entity. Again, I'll explain that properly in a minute. So a party role can be an employee for a contact or a spouse, or for organizations, they could be third-party customers or suppliers where they're working with a company who is a customer or supplier of the business who's using the system. So a declarative role is it's something that the business will say to you when you're looking at the requirements of building a system. And they will say to you, well, we work with customers or suppliers and potentially contractors. So I just want to give 3 examples there. And then a contextual role is where you have a contact who's working within the context of something else. So you've got a sales contact for a quote. You can then have an organization being a customer for an order, or a third-party supplier for a project. And then going back to contact, you've got billing contacts for an invoice. So that gives you the contextual roles. So does anyone have any questions about roles? Okay, I'll carry on.
No, we're good. We're good.
So then with addresses and contact mechanisms, I've mentioned this already, but it removes redundancy. So you can just have a single address record that can be used throughout the entire system within the various roles and used by the various parties. And so having the ability to have an organization use the same address as a contact who is using that address personally, but then also for someone who is, say, a sales manager within a customer, they can also use that address as well. And so there's just no redundancy and no duplication of data by using this model. So I've pretty well answered this already, but I'll just recap. So it gives you flexibility of using contacts and contact mechanisms and addresses and everything in a really flexible way, and then to look at the history of an organization or a contact over a period of time. So these two books that I've got here, the Data Model Resource book, it talks about 3 different levels of declarative patterns for building a party model schema. And I'm just going to talk about level 1 and level 3. I think they're the most important ones to look at from a FileMaker perspective. In that the level 1 declarative pattern, I've got a quick prototype that I'll show you first of all with this. And I think that most people who came to FileMaker without having had a computer science background would have built a database in this way. It's very flat. There's not much in terms of relationships. A lot of data is being duplicated. But the reason I wanted to show it here is because I think it's useful for when you're actually sitting down with a client for the first time and you're going through the requirements with them. It's good to show them something like this, because if they don't have a database background, then it gets them sort of buying into what you're trying to sell them without going into a great deal of complexity. So I think that that's really good, you know, as a starting point. And not that that's what you're going to build for them, but it's just a quick and easy way of actually getting them to the point of understanding and getting them on the same page with you. And then the level 3 declarative pattern is the most flexible of the 3. And it does go into quite a lot of data that when I looked at it, I thought, yeah, I'm not sure how many systems I would actually build with that. So there is some overkill involved. And I think that if you're working with a really large organization, there might be uses for this. But I think when you're working with smaller clients, that I'm not sure that you would use it very often. So now I'm going to go into how to develop the party model. And so I want to start with a couple of ERDs and then go into the prototypes after that. So I'm just going to jump into OmniGraffle. So for the level 1 declarative pattern, basically you're storing the customers and suppliers in completely distinct areas of a system. And you're then going to be saying, well, if you have an organization who can be a customer and a supplier, then you're going to have 2 separate records for them. And so immediately you've got the data duplication. And so from a contact perspective, you could have someone being an employee and they leave their customer or supplier and they go and become a contractor. Then again, you're going to have duplication of data. But I think it's important to look at that with a company who doesn't have experience of working with databases, because it's easy to understand rather than trying to get into any kind of, let's go straight into relationships and start talking like that. So the level 3 declarative pattern is here, and I'm going to start with the full ERD. And so we start off then by saying we're going to have organizations and we're going to have suppliers, and we're going to, organizations and contacts. And we're going to then say, well, a contact who's working at an organization, they're playing a role within that organization. So we have party roles that sits as a join table in between. So this allows us to say that we're going to have a contact who is a contractor working at multiple organizations simultaneously. Or we're going to say that we've got a contact who works at one organization and they're going to leave that organization and go and work somewhere else. And so the party role will then show you from the contact perspective the history of the organizations where they've worked at. And then from there, we've got the declarative roles, which allows us to say, well, an organization is going to be both a customer and a supplier. But also it allows us to say, well, if we're not just a B2B business and we also have B2C, then we can put a contact in as a customer and a supplier. And from both of those perspectives, we can see that information, or we can go to the customer's area of the system, and we can look at both organizations and contacts from within there. So then from there, we can go down into the contact mechanisms and the addresses. So from a party role perspective, you might have someone having their direct dial telephone number, their own work email address, and other contact mechanisms. And so that would be related to the party role. And then from there, you would be able to go across, and organizations could have their own ones, switchboard numbers, websites, and so on like that. And then from a contact perspective, we can then also have personal contact mechanisms and addresses. And then once we go down from there, we've got usages and purposes. So you could say that a contact mechanism is only going to be used for a work scenario, or that someone's going to give you their personal email address and you're only going to be able to contact them for a particular range of hours during the day. And so that would allow you to actually track the usage of a contact mechanism. And the same for addresses, we have usages and purposes as well. And so we can also say from a contact mechanism purpose, we can say, well, that can be used for both business and personal, or it could be just for business or just for personal. Now that gets into the realms of thinking that I don't know how many systems I would actually develop where I would need to track the usage and purpose of addresses and contact mechanisms. So I've done a simplified ERD here, which is more like what I would probably be developing for my clients. So I've removed the usage and purpose from here because I think it would only be larger organizations that would have that kind of interest, or people who are really into their data within the business may want that as well in smaller businesses. So any questions about the ERDs? Okay, so I'm now going to jump into FileMaker then, and I'll start with the level 1 prototype here. Is that okay? Does anyone want me to blow that up? You can all see that okay?
Yeah, a bit bigger if you can.
Okay.
Damon, if you can.
Oh, can't remember the shortcut for zooming. Okay. Okay. So this is a very flat file prototype. So we have organizations and we have contacts. And so within here, we can see relationships to contacts. And it would be a very flat system. So if I want to be in here as a customer and as a supplier, then there's going to be 2 records for me in here. And the telephone, email, and website, they're all fields within this record. There's no relationships going on here. And so here we can say, right, we've got a facility. And so that's giving me the address. But again, everything would be duplicated. And you know, this isn't how you would want to actually develop a system for someone. But I think it does get that kind of buy-in from people that they can really easily look at this and understand what they're looking at without having to go into too much jargon, talk about relationships with them. So I think that really helps with the buy-in. So the next prototype then is we're getting into the more complex system. And so I've based this on Star Wars, so I do apologize if people aren't big fans. So we start off with the organizations. And so here we've got addresses where we can add a new address or we can add an existing address.
Dan, can you zoom that in again, please?
Sorry, yeah.
That's all right, no worries.
So adding a new address will make the address available not just to this organization, but anybody who's in the system. And then obviously if you've got an existing address, you can just pick it from here. So for instance, I can say, well, okay, I want to use the Death Star. And now it's added the address for this organization. And so I can then say that it's going to be used for bill to and ship to, and it's also going to be used just for business. And we can set the priorities and say it's their default address and whether or not we can actually contact them on there for GDPR purposes. And I can also say down the bottom here, when I'm adding roles for people or other organizations, do I want this address to automatically be available to them within their role? So close that back down. And then again, we have a similar thing for contact mechanisms. So I can say, okay, well, this is going to be an electronic address and it's going to be their website. And so just say galactic.com. And we can add that to all roles as well. So just say general inquiries and business. And so once we've got some addresses in there, we can then go and look at roles. So I've put them in already as a customer. And so if I also want to say they're going to be a supplier too, and so I can now see that I've got them in here as both a supplier and a customer. And then I've got some contacts for them over here. So if I now jump to contacts, then I can see the role that this contact is playing within an organization. And if I want to add them to another organization as well, so they've moved on from the Galactic Republic, that's no longer there. And so they're now part of the Rebel Alliance. And so we can see that that's the organization there. So I can say that he's still a Jedi Master. And so I can now start putting some contact mechanisms in for him just for his particular role. So if I say we're going to add a new electronic address and it's going to be his email address. So we can say it's Yoda at the Rebel Alliance.com. And so again, we can say we can contact him for all of these for business. So now that we've got him in in separate roles, if I had actually put an ending date against the Galactic Republic, then that could then show that it's historical and not an active role. And I can also say, well, actually, he's also going to be a customer in his own right. And so now that I can see that he's working for these organizations, but also he's a personal customer. So now if I go across to customers, I can now see that I've got an organization as a customer, and I've also then got Yoda as a personal customer. And so it allows me to easily show both the organizations and contacts within this. And same for suppliers as well, but we can do the same thing there. So this is all very similar in terms of what we do. And so once I've got them in as a supplier or as a customer, I can then start doing quotes, orders and invoices, or suppliers, I can do purchase orders and purchase invoices. So this is where I started to think about the workflow in terms of how I administer the system, in terms of being able to put the different declarative roles in. And so if I want to add a new one, then I can just say we're going to have a contractor in here. And the contact mechanisms, this is where it starts to get more tricky from a user point of view. And as I started to think about the user experience for somebody, as a prototype, this works fine for me because I know exactly how it works and having developed it. Whereas for a user, I was thinking, what's going to be the use case for them for this? It's not going to be something they're going to use on a daily basis. They might only come in here every 3 months or 6 months. So this is quite confusing as a user experience. And so I wanted to then say, well, okay, how does a workflow for someone who's only going to come in and use something sporadically, how should that work? But from my point of view, this works okay. I can come in and say, well, I've got contact mechanism types here. I've then got electronic addresses, and then these are all of the different addresses I've got there. And then for telecommunication numbers, we've got telephone, mobile, and fax. So this is the more complex of the categories within this area. And so for these, they're just standalone value lists essentially. But for this part up here, I thought if you're going to give it to someone who's got to administer this, it needs to be much easier for them to use. And so that's what I'm going to move on to within the next session. But in terms of the party model itself, does anyone have any questions? Is this quite easy to understand? Are you doing this already?
Just a quick question, Damon. In the contact mechanisms, you had something where I think it was the purpose, it was like personal, business and personal as a third entry.
Yes.
And that struck me. It seems strange. Like if they're all toggles, why have a third one?
Yeah, they're not toggles. They're you can actually turn on both personal and business.
Yes.
And you could actually have that one. But obviously this is just a quick example. So it's
I
not
see. Okay.
that's definitely how I would do it, but I would certainly just have personal and business.
Perfect. So you've answered. Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Hey, Damon, to your question, are you using the party model? We are here, and I actually agree with pretty much your interpretation of the Len Silverton work, because I have the book. I read it twice. I thought it was awesome in terms of insights that can be brought into the FileMaker platform. And if I may, just riffing on what you've presented, which awesome presentation. I think one of the interesting challenges is how to implement the party model in FileMaker. The Lens book is basically SQL, which is similar, different. It's a database, but it's got this query and build structure, which is quite different. We've managed to refactor some of our existing systems and build new systems, I think, in alignment. And one of the things I'll throw on the table here, I did a presentation for the New York FileMaker Pro user group on how to manage joins. Like, let me frame the same question that I put to the table over there, which is single address. You said it, I agree. Single address, we did that for sure. You could extend that to email, URLs, phone numbers, and whatnot, but addresses is kind of like low-hanging fruit. And so the question I put forth is, if you're going to do single address, it means you're going to likely have a lot of join records. You're going to join an address to a person record. You're going to join an address to an organization record, maybe to purchase orders and so forth and so on. And I put out to the group 2 different ways of doing it. Do you do it with a single join table with multiple foreign keys, or do you do it with multiple tables with a single foreign key? So I don't think there's a clear-cut answer. It'd be a spoiler alert if I told you what the group voted for. But I like what you've done here. And I think, final closing thought here. For the moment, I like very much that you have addressed the party model as what I call a domain question, that it's pertaining to people and organizations. It's not a technical implementation. It doesn't refer to a particular data structure. It refers to a data model of a particular thing. Party of the first part makes an agreement with party of the second part. I think that's where the word party comes from.
Yeah.
So there you go.
That's
all I got to say for now.
So just to look at what you were saying about addresses then, if I go to a contact and I look at the role that they're playing, the way that I've developed this is that within the role, you can have addresses, then you can see the organization's addresses, and then you can also have personal addresses. And so I've not put any buttons on here to create the personal ones because I wanted to have to go and do that from the contact record. So I can do that from here. And so if I say I'm going to add, oh no, I don't want to do that. I want to create a new one. And I can say the swamp. I haven't got my tab working. There we go, bar. So that can then be a personal address for him. And so if I then go back into the roles and we look across, so I haven't put anything in for his role within the Galactic Republic, but we can see their addresses and contact mechanisms. And now we can see that we've got his personal address in here.
So are you doing join records? Like in our system, we have a table called people. We have a table actually called contacts historically.
Yeah.
And then we did over time, figure out that a given human being that we interact with is actually, he runs a nonprofit, he has a corporate job, and then he's a personal. So he's kind of like three different parties, at least the way we look at it.
Yeah.
And so when we're doing, and then so that's one human being, with three different roles. So that's a one-to-many. And then the addresses are used many, many times all over the place. So I landed on a single join table with multiple foreign keys on the other side. Yeah. As a general architecture, and I've been moving more and more to that direction. It seems economic in terms of use of base tables.
Yeah.
And it won the most number of votes at the New York FileMaker per user group meeting. So I can blame it on them.
So here we can see that we've got an organization, and I've got my join table in the middle for all of the party contact mechanisms that can be telephone numbers, email addresses, and addresses. So all of that is coming off of here. And so it's just a single join table for the organization, but then I also have one for the contacts as well. And so we've got that coming down here, and actually I've got two in this one. But yeah, so there is a join table between all of them. So when I'm looking at these three tabs, there is a join for each of these, for roles, for organizations, and for personal, in order for this to work.
And how do you do the primary? You mentioned earlier, I think, primary email. Do you do that with like we do a bit of a loop back, where you have many a contact or a party with many email addresses, one of which is designated as primary?
Yeah, so I would put them primary for like personal, or for the role that they're playing within the organization. And so that would then, if I change something to be primary, it would look across for any other primaries that have been associated with that role or that contact, and then remove the primary priority, and then set that to be secondary. Is that what you're asking there, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, so it sounds like maybe you're doing a flag that's in the join of phone numbers or emails to designate primary, as opposed to setting the foreign key of the phone or the foreign key of the email into the record itself.
Correct.
So two ways to do it.
Yeah.
I happen to like the latter, but
if I were to say that he's got a personal email address, and someone else that he lives with, being a spouse, would then also use that email address, then I only want the email address to be stored once. So it's then the join table where I'm going to put that flag to say it's a primary email address, because for the other person, it may not be primary. They may have a primary one, but they may share that email address.
Yeah.
And so that's why I've gone with putting the flag within the join table, rather than on the email address record itself.
Yeah. So no, you're hitting all the key points here.
Thank you.
So Damon, I'm interested in the technical debt about managing expiry of records.
Okay.
So I get you can kind of go, this has a date at which this is no longer true. So in a list, I can see that this was a historic thing.
Yeah.
The question is around how much you can automate removing parts of the link, the kind of role records so there was a record there. We need to see that there was a record there, but actually some of the information associated with that record, for example, somebody's old company email address, that particular thing, it's not just that it's expired, but in fact, that isn't even valid data anymore.
Yes.
And that creates a technical debt to me, that there's an awful lot of cleaning up management to do that is not from active records. Just wonder what your view on that was.
I think, yeah, there's got to be a manual aspect to that to a degree, or you have a rule in there where you would be able to say, well, if we have email addresses that have expired and they no longer exist, then have a server schedule that will come in and clean them up after a period of time. So, but yeah, you're absolutely right. There's going to be some technical debt to this, just based on the complexity of it. but I think that the flexibility that this gives you wins out over the technical debt that it creates. But
Okay.
you know, I think that that's a good discussion, because you know, you might look at that and say, well, I completely disagree with that. But I just wanted to bring this as a model that I think is a really flexible way of being able to deal with things and have a rich history of information that could get lost in systems that don't follow this. So any other questions?
Yeah, Damon, do you find it puts on quite a time overhead developing this way round, or as more sort of a traditional way? I appreciate the versatility that it gives you.
Yeah,
I was just thinking in terms of development time. Say you've got a customer who's slightly pressed for money,
yeah,
which they often are. Do you find it puts on much of an overhead?
Yeah, and I would actually have a framework that I would work with that has all of this built in, and that will then be the basis for developing with them, so that I'm not having to reinvent it every time. Because I think it is pretty well straightforward, because you're only really dealing with organizations and contacts. And then once you're getting into the declarative roles, that's where that will differ on a business by business basis. But you always have this starting point of you have to have an organization, then you have to have people. And so by being able to have that as a framework and then building off of that, at least gives you a starting point.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, take your point.
The only thing I wanted to add, Damon, I could have done with this 20 years ago. Oh no, that was before relational databases, but there you go. But it would have been so useful for some of the software that I've built to go, right, okay, this would just solve half the problems that I'm facing still today, maintaining those legacy systems that I had. So it's certainly something I'm going to be looking at going, well, even if we're not going to that level of customization, even taking a more simplified version of this and then applying it still gives you so much more flexibility and scope. So yeah, great presentation, really well, really good.
Thank you. So the next session that I want to do is going to go into the admin area to look at how I can develop an easy to use workflow for people who would only use this on a very sporadic basis. And so I'll be going into user stories in the next session.
Oh, that'll be interesting. Yeah, and as Gary said, great presentation, very clearly explained. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well done. Are you willing to share these slides with us so I can put them up on the site?
Yeah, I might need to do a little bit more work with them just to clean them up, but yes, absolutely.
Yes. So at some point, yeah, we can put them up on the FMBug site.
Yeah, give me a day or two and I'll have them ready.
Yeah.
So just to go back to this, the resources that I've got then are the 2 books, and I'll show you those in physical in a minute. And then there's some web resources as well. There's a guy who works for, I think it's Todd Geist, David Graham. And I think that he did data modeling that scales. I actually attended that DevCon presentation a few years ago. And then he also did one for Pause on Error. And then there's an article written by David C. Hay, or at least based on David C. Hay, who's got his own data modeling book. So that's worth having a look at as well. So, okay. So I'm just going to quickly hold up the book. I don't know if that's too, yeah. So that's volume 1, and that really goes into the party model itself. And then volume 3 looks exactly the same. That is where it goes into the declarative roles and the different levels of them. But I would highly recommend those as books if you want to get more into data modeling. So thank you very much, everybody.
Cheers, Damon. Superb. Great. Nice work.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Damon.
Thank you.
So we're almost back on schedule. I don't know if Wim is ready yet. Wim, are you in there somewhere? Oh, yes, you're there.
I'm good to go.
Are you ready to go ahead now?
Sure.
Okay, well, I'm really looking forward to this. It's really kind of you to give us your time. It's a privilege to have you here. And without further ado, I'll let you get on with it.
All right. So my name is Wim Decorte. I run the FileMaker, director of the FileMaker practice at Soliant Consulting. At Soliant, we have 4 houses. So I run the FileMaker side of the house. We do AWS, Web Native, and Salesforce. But we have grown out of we grew out of the FileMaker space, and we're still very much into it. And that's what I do. We have 30 full-time developers. Before we get into my presentation, I'll be talking about backups, specifically about the different tools that we have available, and show you one that is, I think, often overlooked and can be extremely helpful in putting together a solid and robust the backup strategy that fits into business continuity and disaster recovery, all of those good things. But before we get into that, I want to show you this one and go back to something that Gary had mentioned way back in the beginning on the M1. There's some really good information from 2.4U. There's some stuff from Claris about the performance on M1. This is what we have come up on Soliant. We have a tool called Punisher that we've been using for quite a while now to sort of benchmark specifically versions of FileMaker Server. And we used one of those in my, I believe, March presentation here as well. This one compares the late model 2018 Mac Mini to the M1 Mac Mini. So it's as best as you can get without the M1 and then the version M1. I don't want to get too deep into that, and I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but my message is be a little careful when you promise performance, right? Because it's a mixed bag. There are things that are way faster on the M1. There are things that are about the same, and then there are things that actually are significantly slower on the M1. So it really depends on how your solution is built, how it's using the various things that we do in solutions, how much load you put on that. So don't go off and selling your customers on the promise of just flat out better performance. You may not get it. I'm talking specifically about FileMaker Server, right? So the best possible scenario is that you get an M1 Mac Mini as your server, and then all your clients are on M1 machines. Overall, when you put it all together, yes, you'll get significantly better performance. Most of that will come from the client side, though, not from the server side. So if you look at just the server side, it isn't all roses. The 2 ones that I want to call out specifically that are significantly faster is omitting data, right? So on a 20 concurrent sessions running PSOS on that Mac Mini 2018 takes 130 seconds. Do the same thing on a Mac Mini M1, and it takes over, well, I would say roughly double that time. Slow searches, same thing, about twice as slow. There are other things that are significantly faster. Overall, when I run this enough times, I'm confident to say you probably, and again, making a little bit of an abstraction on how your solutions are built and what exactly they do, I would say getting from 10% to 30% performance benefit is probably more realistic than some of the numbers that we see specifically from Claris, right? So be a little careful with that. Happy to go into that in a lot more detail after this meeting or in subsequent meetings or just on the forums, whatever. All right. We're going to talk about backups. And like I said, we've been talking to our customers about backups in the context of disaster recovery, business continuity, a lot over the last couple of months, and it fits in with the increase in ransomware attacks that we see throughout. And there was a big one that hit quite a few FileMaker customers that were using 888 as their hosting provider up in LA. So those were down for a couple of days, and they ended up paying the ransom. But it took down a large number of businesses for 2-3 days. With a lot of uncertainty whether they would get back, right? And also when 888 restored the files after they got the encryption key and paid the ransom, a lot of the servers came back with damaged files. So a lot of this is going on, and we take that as an opportunity to go and talk to our customers and say, what about your backup strategy? How often do you do backups? And and this is not new, the 2 questions that we use to talk to our customers is how much data are you willing to lose? because you're going to lose some data, right? FileMaker doesn't do hot backups. You cannot automatically synchronize everything to another server. You can get close, but you can't do it natively. So that means that if your server goes down, you will lose some data. How long is that? How much data are you willing to lose? And don't say nothing, because that's not an option. And the answer to, say, 10 minutes worth of data, an hour's worth of data, a day's worth of data, the answer to that question and the answer to the second question is, how long are you okay to be without your system? Are we talking about an hour to get everything back up and running, half a day, 2 hours, 15 minutes? So the answer to those two questions, how much data are you willing to lose and how long can the system be down for, that will drive and determine how much money they will have to spend on it, right? Because the shorter those both intervals, the more money it'll cost to get there. I've built high availability systems, FileMaker systems for banks. I did a DEF CON presentation about 10 years ago for a system that we did for HSBC. So you can get there. It'll just take a lot of effort and a lot of time to get there. So those two questions are the questions that we bring to the customers and say, okay, what are we talking about here? And very often, of course, when we go look at FileMaker Server, we have two native backup mechanisms built in, right? You have your backup schedules. They run on a schedule, whatever you want, every hour, every day, every week, whatever those may be. And then we have progressive backups. And to make sure that we understand what those mean, progressive backups only gives you 2 sets, right? And by default, when you install FileMaker Server, they run every 5 minutes. The moment at which they run is unpredictable, because they will kick in whenever your database engine starts, right? So if I start from a server that's completely shut down and I start FileMaker Server and it's 3 minutes after the hour, then the first progressive backup will run at 8 minutes after the hour, right? The start time plus 5 minutes, and then at 30 minutes past the hour, right? So you cannot set exactly the time at which progressive backups will run. You can set the interval, and the interval determines how long FileMaker Server will collect changes and then applies that to the older of the 2 backup sets. So you have no full control over when it runs. You can only determine or set the amount of time that elapses between 2 progressive backups. And you only get 2 sets, right? You cannot use progressive backups to say, you know what, I did a boo-boo 2 hours ago. I'll go grab that backup so that I can get the record back, right? You can't do that with progressive backups. Progressive backups is limited to 2 sets out of the box. You can't change that. So progressive backups really are your go-to for your immediate restore. If something happens on the server and you have progressive backups running, that's your go-to, right? Because that's going to be your backup set that minimizes the amount of lost data, right? And the answer to the first question, how much data are you willing to lose? Progressive backups can give you that. And then you have your backup schedules. Your backup schedules, you determine exactly at what time they're run, right? So it's based on the schedule. It'll run exactly when you tell it to run. You can also set how many backup sets it'll keep. And that's kind of important because of that mechanism of hard linking that FileMaker Server does. Because one of the things that we see very often on the forums, and the use case that I'll talk about today as well, is people say, well, my solution is huge. I have 80 gigs worth of FileMaker files, and I have 200,000 remote container files, right? So they all add up to maybe 150 gigs worth of data. I really can't run a backup every hour because my hard drive will fill up, right? And that's a very common misunderstanding. FileMaker Server backups don't work that way, right? So a FileMaker Server backup does not consume the amount of hard drive space that is equal or equivalent to your total set of files. It'll only do that if you happen to change every single file in your backup. And when you have remote container data, that's very unlikely, right? Your remote container data will fill up or will accumulate over time. But once you have that container container data in a record somewhere, that data tends up to be static. And when FileMaker Server runs it backup, it's smart enough to realize, hey, that particular piece of that particular file, that remote container file or the FileMaker file hasn't changed since the last backup. I'll just add a hard link to that file, and I will not occupy new disk space for that file. And let me show you that in motion here. this is my M1 Mac Mini. I have a very hard to guess password. I'm sure you guessed it by now. And I have my backup schedule run every hour, right? Nothing fancy, it's an hourly backup schedule. If I go to my terminal, and I go to my backups, you can see that in Finder, my backups, every single backup that I have is listed there, right? So I have a backup on the hour. These are my nightly default scheduled backups. If I go to this one and I do a get info on that backup set, right? It'll actually tell me I have 88 gigs worth of data in my backup. Right, so for 44,000 files, thereabouts. So this clearly is a solution that has, this one has something like 40 FileMaker files and then a slew of remote container files. Now, if I go to this one, say the noon backup, exactly the same thing, right? So that'll tell me it's 88 gigs. If I were to add up all of that file size across all my backups, it would probably be higher than the amount of disk space that I actually have in this machine. So clearly something is off there. So what I did in preparation for this meeting, I have my noon backup. So let's just go there really quick. Live. There. So these are all the files that I have in that particular backup. And the file that I want you to have a look at is this forms file. That's part of the backups. See that number 5 here to the left of the backups or the file entry there. That's actually the number of hard links that exist to that file, right? So every file, any operating system, it's not specific to Mac, Windows, Mac, Linux, all do the same thing. What is exposed to the file system is nothing more than a pointer to a piece of hard drive space called an inode that takes up physical space on your hard drive. You can have multiple files, which are nothing but pointers that point to the exact same piece of real estate on your hard drive. So that's what this 5 or this 8 actually means, right? That means that there's 5 pointers that point to the exact same inode on my hard drive. In FileMaker speak, that means that there's 5 different backups where that form file hasn't changed. So there's only one of those on my hard drive, but it features in 5 different backup sets. Right? So if I back out of this, and I go to the one that ran an hour later, what I did between that noon backup and that 1 p.m. backup is I actually made a change to that forms file. And you can see that the number went down from 5 to 3. There's been 3 backups since that 1 p.m. file, the 1, 2, and 3 p.m. that have run in the meantime. So there's now 3 hard links to that file, but there were 5 hard links to the form file in the other backup sets. So because I changed that file, I actually have 2 copies of that forms file on my hard drive. One with 5 hard links to it for all the other backups, and then one with 3 for the changes that I made since that backup, right? So it's a very important under the hood way of how FileMaker Server run backups that is extremely efficient. That's a long explanation to get to the point of don't let customers talk themselves into not doing backups because they think they'll fill up their hard drive, right? Yes, you have to calculate it out and make sure that you understand how many backups they want to keep and all of that good stuff. But way too often I see people not doing backups because they think their backup will fill up. Right? So keep that hard linking in mind. FileMaker Server is actually incredibly efficient at keeping track of what files have changed in backups and not occupying more disk space for those files. Right? So keep that in mind, because by not having to worry about that, you can give your clients more backups. So that's probably the single most misunderstood thing about FileMaker Server, regular FileMaker Server backups that we have out there. What it really means is that if you have an hourly backup schedule, I could make, instead of, say that I want to keep 8 backups sets, right? So I can make a backup schedule that runs at 7 a.m. I can make a different schedule that runs at 8 a.m. I can make yet another schedule that runs at 9 a.m., right? So you can do one schedule for every hour. That hard linking that I just described, that only works within one schedule, right? So it doesn't port between schedules. And that's because FileMaker needs to keep the integrity of the sets kept within a backup schedule. It has to leave those alone, right? It can only work with hard links within one schedule. So if you want to do hourly backups, it's actually better to just create one schedule and set the number of backup sets to keep as high as you want it to go, because that'll make sure that FileMaker Server can be very efficient at the way that it keeps those hard linkings and reduces the amount of disk space that it will consume. All right. And I'll take, if you want to ask any questions, ask away. If not, we'll do them at the end. So with this particular client, they have about 40 files. If because I'm hosting a copy of their files on this particular server, there are 47 files in that solution. You've seen the size, about 88 gigs. There's about 45,000 files in that solution. Most of them are the remote container files. They have a really old Mac Mini, and taking a full backup took minutes. So they didn't want to take hourly backups because the users were actually seeing or feeling the effect of the backups, right? So they were punting on backups for performance reasons. And that's another big one that we see out there, right? Where people don't do backups because it takes a long time. Obviously, the answer is get a faster machine, right? Because then you can really reduce the impact on the backups. If I do a full backup of this solution with the M1 Mac Mini, it takes about a minute and a half to go through that. And that's when I actually mimic what the users are doing. This particular set of files, there's 47 files, but there's 2 huge ones. There's 2 files that are about 35 gig each. And these happen to be the files that gets changed all the time, right? So that means that every single backup run really has to find 70 gigs worth of disk space. And it has to physically copy 70 gigs worth of data around. So even with fast disk I/O, it'll still take some significant time. The faster the machine is, specifically the faster the disk I/O is, the faster you'll get through those backups. So that's one way to solve that issue. This client had no appetite of spending more money. They didn't want to go for a faster machine. So what can we do? Because they didn't want to lose even an hour's worth of data. So clearly we had to find a solution. And the solution really comes in the form of snapshots. Snapshots, there's 2 kinds of snapshots. There are snapshots that can be done from outside the machine. Those really only work if you have a virtualized environment, right? AWS, VMware, pretty much anybody who offers virtualization of the server can do snapshots external, meaning that it's not the operating system of your machine itself that takes the snapshot, it's the hypervisor, the thing that makes the virtualization happen, can do snapshots. If we look very quickly at AWS here, I have my instances running, and AWS has the ability to run snapshots. In fact, we know that FileMaker Cloud runs on AWS, right? If you go and look at your FileMaker Cloud backups, your sets here, and this one runs every, every 20 minutes, I believe, is the default backup schedule on AWS. This is not a regular backup. This is not a typical FileMaker backup schedule as we know it. This is actually Amazon snapshots that FileMaker Cloud uses to make that happen. So if you host your servers in the cloud, you can use AWS snapshots. The beauty of this is that, and I'll get to the speed, but I can skip ahead a little bit. Snapshots are blazingly fast, right? That's the main reason why you would want to use them, because snapshots don't operate at the file system level. Typical FileMaker backups, the schedules or the progressive backups, work at the file system level. They'll look at what file has changed, got to copy this file, from this place to that place, right? So that happens at the file system level. Snapshots operate at a much deeper level, and they don't care about files. They look at the hard disk and say, what has changed on this hard drive? And I'll just take a copy of the things that have changed, and I can reassemble that whole hard drive at any time that I wish. But the act of taking the snapshot is incredibly fast. And I'll show you those numbers in a little bit. So AWS, anything that can give you a virtualized machine can give you the ability to run snapshots outside of FileMaker Server. I can skip ahead a little bit. The speed is the main reason why you want to do that, but it comes with one huge caveat. You've got to put your FileMaker Server, your files actually, in a safe space before you do the snapshot, right? Because FileMaker Server, as is not snapshot aware. If you take a snapshot of your FileMaker Server, internal or external, your files will come back as improperly closed at best or damaged as worst, right? So you got to work with FileMaker to make sure that the snapshot happens safe. So that's sort of like the premise that we're getting into. And it's one of the reasons where we've been a little careful talking about this in the open, because you can't just roll a snapshot out and expect good things. You have to be a little careful. But anyway, external snapshots are great for that business continuity aspect of it too, right? Because they don't live on the machine. Now you have a backup that is automatically, by default, not on the machine, meaning that if that machine got compromised, doesn't matter. AWS snapshots can reassemble that hard drive. You attach it to another machine, and you're up and running. AWS snapshots are also a multi-zone, multi-region, right? If that Amazon data center in Ohio gets compromised, or in this case, North Virginia gets compromised, I got a copy somewhere else automatically if I make it so, right? So I can spin up a server in a totally different data center, and I'm up and running. So from that perspective of protecting against ransomware attacks and things like that, it's great, right? But these are external snapshots. If your FileMaker Server is a physical machine, can't really use them because there's nothing that can give you those external snapshots, right? So use external snapshots when you can. If you can't, we'll get to that in a sec, right? So in this particular case, I had a client with a Mac Mini. The client is all Mac. So what do? It turns out that the time machine, oops, didn't want to do that. We'll get to that in a sec. I wanted to go here. Time machine operates on a snapshot level, right? It's because it looks at your drive and says, I got to back up this drive. What has changed on that drive? It doesn't use file level things necessarily. So, but we know from a best practices point of view, using Time Machine on your FileMaker Server is a big no-no, right? Because it'll touch or use those live files, can do that. So I'm actually using my Time Machine and set it to not back up automatically. That is crucial, right? So that's what I'm not doing. But what I am using is, and this is a small shell script that I'm using, and the magic is in line number 5 here, right? So the Time Machine has a command line that I can use, TM util, this Time Machine utility. I can say, hey, take me a local snapshot. When I do that on this particular machine, it takes less than a second to do that. Now, the things that are important are the things that I surround that with. And this is the extent of my script, right? So there's not a lot to it. It's less than 10 lines, but I have to put the FileMaker server in pause mode. And then when it's done, I have to put in resume mode. And you can go like, well, we know that pausing your files actually suspends. It doesn't disconnect any users, but it suspends all the users' interaction with the files. So you can go like, isn't that, are my users not going to be affected by that? Well, they will be, because their session will be suspended. But it's so fast that by the time you get to this backup, this one on this machine takes about 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds. If my hard drive is busy for whatever reason, it takes about 2 seconds to get through that, right? So I can take a full volume snapshot on that server in a safe way, because I can restore files from that snapshot, because my FileMaker Server had the chance to suspend the user activity, put the files in a clean mode, then the snapshot happens in less than 2 seconds. right? So no file system operation can be as fast as snapshots.
Are you storing the snapshot locally or on an external hard drive?
The time machine can only do them locally. When you use local snapshots, it sets aside a little piece of the hard drive to do that. Now it's incredibly space efficient, right? The snapshot, just like the FileMaker backups, the snapshot isn't the full 250 gigs of your full volume. It just says, well, what's the differential? And even the very first snapshot is nothing more than a differential from your actual machine. It says, I'm just taking sort of like an index of your hard drive, and that's all I need to store. And then every snapshot after that is what has changed since that. So that it knows when it has to restore, it knows the current state of your hard drive, and it basically rolls back the changes that have happened since. So at no point does it store, in this case, I have a 250 gig drive, at no point does it store 250 gigs worth of data. So,
hey Wim, a question on that? It's taking a differential. Is that a differential on the file level or on the sector of the hard drive?
At the hard drive level.
So it's even super space efficient. Wow.
Yep. So the only caveat there, and it's kind of different on Windows, and if we have time, I'll show you the equivalent setup on Windows, because this is all operating systems do snapshots, right? So you can do the same on Windows. The thing that is peculiar about Apple is that Apple makes decision for you. We all know that, right? So there's not a lot of granularity in how many snapshots it'll preserve. It'll delete snapshots when it thinks it's running out of disk space and all of that stuff. So I have this one in, and you can sort of see, I have this one set up to run actually I can show you why would I talk about it. If I go to my script schedules, this is the snapshot, right? It runs that VSS shell script that I just showed you, and it runs every 7 minutes, right? Because it only takes a couple of seconds, I can make it run every 2 minutes if I want to, right? In this case, I'm okay with it running every 7 minutes. And you can sort of see it ran at 32 minutes past 3, then 25:18. So it goes back about an hour in actual 7-minute snapshots. And then after that, it starts only preserving hourly snapshots. And that's not my doing. That's not something that I configured. That's just the way that Mac OS keeps track of its snapshots, right? You don't have full control over that. And that's why you would never use it as a standalone part of your backup strategy, right? But it is a third option together with progressive backups, backup schedules, and snapshots that can give you a really comprehensive backup strategy that absolutely minimizes the amount of data that your clients tend to or would stand to lose if something were to happen.
So I thought traditionally that Time Machine uses HFS volume format on external drives, not APFS. Now with M1s that are all APFS, this is happening locally with that format, correct?
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Even on a non-M1, if you have the Apple file system APFS, it does the same thing. And in this case, because the M1 comes, I was trying to be cheap. The cheapest M1 that is somewhat powerful, I tried to save some money, and I got the smallest amount of disk space that I could get natively. So actually, my FileMaker service configured to have its backups and live files on that external drive, right? So you can actually configure your snapshots to include external drives as well. So those are happening as well.
What's the restore process for a snapshot?
I'm thankful that you asked, because taking fast backups is all well and fine, but you have to be able to restore from them, right? That's always the key. And that's the thing that trips people up with their ransomware attacks, right? Because they say, hey, I have backups, I'm fine. These ransomware attacks have become increasingly intelligent. What they'll do is they'll infect a machine or your network, and then they will lay dormant for days, weeks, or months until they figured out where your backups are. Then they'll attack your backups first, and then work their way back and encrypt the machine. So by the time you go like, holy crap, my machine has been encrypted, I'll go back to my backups, you have no backups, right? So if you think about this, these are the AWS snapshots. For most of the layperson developer, FileMaker developer, this is daunting, right? Like, how do I even begin? Yes, I know I have snapshots, but now what? Like, how do I start using them? The way that we do it in our Soline.cloud is we do the same thing, right? Soline Cloud is based on AWS. We do pretty much everything in AWS, but we give the users a dashboard where they can go and pick a backup, a snapshot, and restore it automatically, right? So they can attach it to another machine if they want to for inspection or just replace their production files. So having a decent restore procedure is going to be key. When you use AWS has great tools and APIs, so you can certainly roll your own restore procedure, but you have to have one. In the case of the Mac, it's actually very simple. You go into your time machine, right? Because all my snapshots are right there, right? So you can see them here. These are all my snapshots. So the time machine interface actually is smart enough to know that I've taken a snapshot myself, but you can just restore them from here. And that's as simple as it gets, right? So restoring from a time machine, the time it takes is actually the time physically it takes to copy that file over to whatever destination that you want to copy it over, right? So while the backup is blazingly fast, the restore, because the restore happens at the file system level, that's going to take as much time as it physically takes to copy that file over, right? So the restore isn't as fast as the backup. So keep that in mind. But when you're running on Mac, the restore functionality is built into the operating system. That's just the time machine.
Wim, just to add to that as well, it's because you're backing up the live files because you're pausing them. Your restore is going to the same location. So it's not like having a backup on a different drive and you're having to restore and copy back over to those. It does do the copy, but the point is from an interface point of view, that's really, really neat because you just literally pick the time, hit restore, and it's going to end up in the same location it was before.
Yes, you do have the option to restore to a different place. If you say, yeah. I'm not sure, but yes. But the normal restore is that just go to your time machine, restore that state. You're done.
Yeah.
Hey, Wim, question. Does this shell TM util, can you use that to programmatically access some of the time machine backups and, move them off to an external hard drive using some shell script running from cron?
You could. It gets complicated a little bit because you actually have to mount the snapshots to get access to the files. But if you're talking about taking whatever the snapshot itself is, then no. You don't have access to that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does. I mean, I see what you've done here. It's super clever. You're basically, you figured out a way to capture the backup super duper fast. And I'm just wondering, what can be added to that? The ability to be, because OS X seems to be very multi-threaded, and there's usually some spare CPU cycles and spare I/O kicking around depending on what you're doing. And it's if you could programmatically reach into the backups that you've made super fast and archive them, it would get you past the 1 hour threshold that you demonstrated earlier. Like Time Machine, it's baked in that it only keeps an hour's worth.
No, it basically keeps your whatever your interval, like mine is set to 7 minutes, right? So
and then it keeps hourly after that.
Yep. So I get a full hour of 7-minute ones, and then hourly after that.
Yeah, that's a good pattern. I think we could live with that. And did you say the Time Machine? Does it have to be on the same drive that the files are on, or can it be piped onto an external drive to give you 2 disks? I might have missed that.
The snapshot of a drive is stored with the drive. So you can't say, here's my drive, but take my snapshot over there.
Okay, so it's single. You're still vulnerable to a single drive failure as things stand.
Absolutely. Okay. And that's why you have to have a complementary strategy that involves multiple backup types to different volumes and all of that, right? Because the snapshots are locally to the drive. If the drive fails, you're done.
Right.
Which is why I'm such a big fan of something that is virtualized, because then the snapshots, when they happen externally, are not even part of the machine, right? They're done entirely differently outside of your machine to begin with.
Yep, very cool.
Right. So very quickly, Windows has the same thing. On Windows, it's called Shadow, right? Create Shadow. Windows has something called volume shadow service, something like that. I forget the exact name. But it's just as simple. You put your FileMaker files in pause mode. You do the create shadow, and you basically say, hey, take a shadow of my D drive, because I have my FileMaker files on the D drive here. Resume my files and delete the oldest of my shadow copies so that I don't fill up the space. Because unlike macOS, Windows will fill up your hard drive if you let it. That's not entirely true, because at the drive level, you can say, here's the maximum amount of space that you can use for shadow copies. And you can make it as big or as small as you want to. And then when it hits that, it'll start deleting the oldest one. So in this case, I just let it accumulate to the level that I'm happy with. And then I build it into my mechanism that takes the shadow copy and do it from there. Now, unlike macOS, Windows doesn't have a nice, pretty UI to do the restore, right? And the restore is important. But there is a freeware called Shadow Copy View that you can download. And that will actually show you all your snapshots that you have. Right, so I have 64 snapshots. That's all like the ones that I keep on that particular drive, and I can get to it. And at the bottom here, it'll show me all the files that are part of that snapshot, and then I can say copy that file to wherever I need to restore it to. Right. So you have to do a little more effort on the Windows side, because you have to install this tool to get it. It's not built in part of the operating system. But it does come with a full set of command line tools to prune them, go into them, mount them somewhere. So if you're into operating system level scripting on the Windows side, it's incredibly powerful. If you're more UI inclined, then this particular tool will get you that same functionality like you have with Time Machine on macOS.
On the Windows server that I'm running, I just go into the FileMaker server folder where the live databases are, and I can right-click on it and say show previous snapshots, and it'll list all the previous snapshots, and then you can click on it and restore.
Yep. Yep, that'll work too, for as long as you put them into a safe space. But yeah, absolutely. All right, so to recap, both Windows and macOS, Linux has the same thing. Linux is a little fancy, because for Linux to have snapshotting, and of course we can have FileMaker Server on Linux, you have to install your FileMaker system with all LVM support, right? So it's a choice you have to make when you install the operating system, because out of the box, otherwise you wouldn't have it. But once you do, it's available to you there as well. Different tool sets, but the same functionality exists, right? So Windows, Mac, Linux, you can use internal snapshotting. The thing to keep in mind, as was pointed out, is that they stay with the machine itself. So if your machine gets blown away, your snapshots are not going to do it for you. But it is a incredibly fast way if you do it safe. And the only thing to make it safe is to put the files in pause state and then resume. But if you do, you get tremendous benefits in speed, right? So there really shouldn't ever be an excuse anymore to say my solution is too big or my machine is too slow. If that's the case, then think snapshots and give the clients that ability to have backups and absolutely reduce that amount of data that they would lose if something were to happen. Complement that with progressive backups. Remember that progressive backups only keeps 2 sets, so you can't really use it to get restore points that go back beyond the. If you stick to the default 5 minutes, that means you don't have a backup that is older than 10 minutes. So keep that in mind. And then you have your hourly backups, progressive backups, and regular hourly or whatever the regular backup sets. Keep in mind that hard linking, right? It's incredibly efficient. It's very often overlooked, but you can use it to good effect to have that conversation with your clients to say, you know what, let's review your backup strategy, and all the excuses of my solution is too big, my machine is too slow, they basically go out the window because we have the tools available to us.
Wait, quick question for you. So the ability of VMs to do kind of the snapshot at the disk level, would that be an advantage over, say, running it in containerized using, say, Docker or something like that?
Not really, because a Docker is just a fancy virtualization, right? So you can get the same kind of backups on that level.
Okay.
The thing with Dockers or Kubernetes for that matter is that FileMaker server isn't quite there yet. We played with it extensively at Soliant, and we know that that's where Claris is going to take FileMaker server at some point, or at least give it as an option. But I wouldn't deploy FileMaker server in a Docker at this point. It's way too big to begin with. Even if you take out all the stuff that you can take out, which is a little iffy. But I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't Dockerize it.
Thanks.
How much, if you delete a file off the server, how long does that live in snapshots before it gets purged from the snapshots?
For as long as you have a snapshot.
Okay.
Of the time before you deleted it.
Okay.
I want to put some context to this as well. Is that, by the way, Wim, I read your article with this. I wish I deployed it about 3 weeks ago because something happened to us this morning. We upgraded to FileMaker 19 eventually, so we finally got there. So it took a while to do that. And this morning, for some weird reason, so FileMaker 18 has been rock solid, no problems at all. On our 4 servers, no issues. 19 this morning on our warehouse server, which does all of our stock movements for our warehouse. And that thing's been live for 7 years without a single failure, not a single blip. This morning, for some reason, in FileMaker 19, complete server lockup. Total lockup in the middle of 70 people with iPads picking. We run it transactionally, but the point is you've got all these iPads trying to do multi-transactional write backs to the database, and the database just literally stopped. So if I had the snapshot in place, I would have then gone, well, okay, I didn't lose any data because I had to recover the files because there was no other option. It was too live. That's the problem. So in this instance, I could have done worst case scenario and said, right, okay, I could roll back maybe 2 minutes ago. Guys, what do you know you picked in 2 minutes? The guys would know. We could find that from the logs. We could then put the data back in and find a way of doing that. But at the moment, for the size of the stuff that we're working on, I agree with you totally, Wim, is the fact that I've got no excuse. I've just got to do the time now to get to this sort of methodology and get this thing rolled in, because our backups, our nightly backups, one of our servers takes 45 minutes on the actual server to run because of the amount of files that are on there. So if I can speed that up with a snapshot and so forth, then great. Another thing to add is I've noticed on the chat, a lot of people are looking at this as a DR sort of scenario sort of thing. It's not about if your data is going to become corrupt. It's about your rollback, your time of loss of data for your business. It's looking at it from a point of view that if you said, right, if you went to a company and said, right, what's the maximum, as Wim said at the start, what's the maximum you can lose? If they said, I want to lose 5 minutes, brilliant. Snapshotting will give you that flexibility. If you then said, oh, I've been hit by ransomware and I roll back, well, the reality is roll back to the last FileMaker full backup you had yesterday, and that will probably be good enough because your company's been hit hard for a ransomware attack. So you've got to look at these things in context of what you want. If it's for a failure, a complete system failure of a server crash or a network failure, which can happen if a switch crashes in the middle of doing something that's outside your control, what's your loss to the business? And it's about putting these control steps in to minimize that loss for the company. And I think that's the key thing I've noticed. And we run in VMware, so I'm certainly looking at this as an option to go, pause the database, take a snapshot on their core databases, that's fine. I'm now looking at it from another way and going, re-engineer our system. So those horrible systems that are really big, that are changing regularly, might move them onto its one server, which sounds a bit weird to put it all in one place. But now if I snapshot that server, all my critical data is done every second, every 5 seconds. I can snapshot as quick as I want. It doesn't matter. And then the supporting files could be on another server that's backing up every hour. It doesn't matter. You can start playing with that sort of methodology.
Exactly, and to extend that, because you're absolutely right. We've done that in quite a few heavy-duty deployments where there's always, say, 150 concurrent users on the server. The server is a really beefy server and is up to the task, but huge solution, like 300 gigs worth of data. By doing, and if the server is either internally on VMware or say externally on AWS, I can take the snapshot, or I can take AWS, make the snapshot. And if I then need to move a copy of that backup to say S3 or anywhere else, I can attach that snapshot to a different machine that is tasked with nothing but copying and moving that files. My production FileMaker server doesn't have to do that, right? You can, because you can use all the automation tools that you have at your disposal. You can spin up another machine, attach the snapshot, do whatever you need to do there, but do that away from your production environments. And all of that can be fully automated.
Yep. Just got to spend the time. Got to build it.
Sure.
This is an interesting approach. Heidi and I have been talking. We're going to the Pause on Air in the fall, and we've been talking about, with the spate of ransomware attacks, it'd be interesting to actually, create a little sandbox and actually do a ransomware attack on a server and sort of see what the fallout is. I mean, if the cache is there, presumably you're dead in the water. If it's a non-volatile file that's just for reference purposes, presumably that would be usable if it's, relatively non-changing. And sort of looking at what the signifiers are that you can grab onto. If you have a hard link in a backup, does that mean your backup's free and clear and you can just fire that right up and off you go? And so, sort of to Gary's situation here, oftentimes high availability is a critical aspect of it. Like you're throwing 100 people out of work if you don't have the database up and running. So there's sort of the right way to do it, where you just go to the last good backup and you salvage what you can, you bring it back online. But if there are any shortcuts to be had that will guarantee that you still have good data integrity and you minimize data loss, what are those? And so to me, I think the ultimate answer is probably going to be some kind of hybrid approach. Like, this is a reference database, just throw that thing back online so we can get the show on the road. And then here are things that are highly volatile with transactions. What can we salvage? How can we salvage it? What are the signifiers of what was lost versus what was, made it in there? Is there any way to restore anything from the cache or capture the cache and dump it and possibly reconstitute something like that? So all of those things are things that we're interested in looking at just to see, what's possible. But I think what you've got here is a great start, and certainly goes a long way towards bringing things back online as fast as possible with as little data loss as possible.
Yeah, and I mentioned the business continuity at the beginning there, and that's an important aspect, and I think both you and Gary touched on that. For instance, in the case of a ransomware, or really anything else, like a total server meltdown, if you have a backup somewhere, then yes, you have your backup, right? You can restore it. But sometimes, and in case of the ransomware, it may take a couple of days before you can get through that. How is the business going to continue to run without the system? Right?
Yes.
And again, at some of the bigger organizations, we had to think through that and sit with them and whiteboard it. And one of the approaches could be as simple as, at certain points in certain stages of whatever transaction it is, it may be you're taking a credit application, needs to be scored before the money can be dispersed. At certain critical points during that, you just spit out the data to Excel, right? Or use the FileMaker data file script steps to write out a log that it's not in FileMaker. That if that FileMaker system went away suddenly, they still have those Excel sheets or those text files with their current state, the current clients, whatever the thing was, that they can then use pen and paper or use their Excel and continue to work on that, right? So that's another important aspect of that disaster recovery, business continuity aspect that we can build into our solutions that goes way beyond just, do I have a backup? And I think as consultants, we have to have these conversations with our clients, because our clients, they know how to do their business, but they don't necessarily know how to think about these things, right? So we have to ask the questions, we have to take their hand and lead them there, and then propose these things that we have at our disposal.
Yeah, there are Windows tools out there that will allow you to basically, crash the system and capture everything. You're basically freezing it in time and say, show me everything that's sitting in the cache. And FileMaker has a ton of stuff that it keeps in a cache. It'd be interesting to see what, it's probably all encrypted, but maybe not. Tom Fitch out in the Pacific Northwest ran an audit like that, and he had the system that he was working on as a user crashed and then mined. And the FileMaker database credentials were stored in clear text in the cache, in his local session cache. So maybe FileMaker or Claris may be under the assumption that that's so far out of the realm of possibility that only a forensic auditor would ever bring a tool like that to bear, and so that's not a realistic risk. But it seems like some of that stuff may be in the clear and may be retrievable, and so that's
whether it's a risk or not depends on the client. For example, for most companies, it's probably not a risk. If you were working at Boeing, traveling overseas, then it's very much a risk.
Contractor, etc. Anyway, there's a lot to explore there, and we're interested in exploring it.
Agreed. And yeah, maybe we should put our heads together and do something like that at Pause on Error. I think that would be very.
Yeah, I think that'd be fun.
I think with this as well is looking at that way you write the systems. I've got a lot of legacy systems that are crying out for rewrite, and it's just getting the time to do it. So, but that said, I think there's a lot to be said about trying to create things that are more transactional, but transactional in a way. If stuff doesn't need to be 100% up to date, i.e., I'm going to scan an item, do I need to see that across the system everywhere instantaneously? Yes or no? And that's all the clients and all the clients you deal with, and certainly my boss will tell me that yes, that has to happen. But I'm not saying you shouldn't build that way. You should build that way, but if you can sustain the loss. So there's a point that you could go, well, if I write that to a ledger file and then I have another process that will process that ledger file, in the process of processing the file, and this is what we've started to build, is as I'm processing the file, I'm setting flags in the system that say I've updated the relevant locations of where it's going. So if a crash then occurred, I can go back to that process file and I can look at all the flags at that point. And then I could then continue the process from where I left off. Certainly if you're then rolling back stuff, you can work on that. So this is something we're looking at of how we're building the files, certainly for those absolute critical ways of working. Providing that log file and the ledger file, which is the big caveat, doesn't get corrupted itself. So you've got to work out your systems to make sure these things stay up. So, and it's like the presentation I did, I think it was about a year ago, I was saying just about like, think of the security on your systems, think of what you're doing. I've seen a lot of people saying about like doing the snapshots, and you can do these. That what's happening now with like all the VMware platforms is you have what's called drive object locking as well to help you against ransomware. So the benefit of object locking is you write out your backup. Wasabi supports this, Amazon supports this. And then, as Wim rightly says, the first thing any ransom attacker is going to do, they're going to sit dormant, they're going to infect your backups, and then they're going to encrypt you. And that is the reality of what happens. With object locking is it gets written, and not even Amazon, Google, Wasabi, no one can touch that file for 30 days. It gets written once, and it has a lock on it that says you can't overwrite it. So if the ransomware attacked, they then go, right, I'm going to overwrite your backups. They can't. Nothing can change it. Not even the owners of that hard drive system can touch it. So there is that point. If you've got mission critical stuff that you need a backup, you can lose a day's data, write your backups and then object lock them. Therefore, you've given that company the absolute security that the backups cannot be overwritten for at least, most of them are sticking at 30 days, but I think they're going to extend that to 60, the way things are going.
But you also have control over that, Gary. You can set that yourself to 120 days if you want, and then possibly automatically delete at the end. So while there's a default, you have a lot of control over that as well.
Yeah, and I think if you, I don't know, I don't think Wasabi are there with that yet. I think Amazon are. You can say, I think Wasabi are set to 30 at the moment, but I may be wrong with that. But yeah, great presentation, really good.
Thanks.
One small point. I've seen I've run recovered files. I'll come out and say it. And whenever I do that, even, for expedient reasons, pragmatic reasons, I'll always look to see the file that I would have restored if I had the time to do it, and I'll zip it and pull it aside just in case the recover file, shows trouble down the road. Then I can go back and do it the, appropriate, technically correct way.
I agree. I did the same thing this morning. I literally took a backup of all the live files before I fired the server backup. So, just in case, and they all recovered and it was fine.
Yeah, so, just reach back and get the, the pre-crash file and zip it so it doesn't get wiped out as the, the backup runs and it disappears after a while.
Just to say as well, there's a lot of talk in the chat. I'm happy we'll go through this after saying there was a lot of questions and bits and pieces, some aimed at me, some aimed at all of us, I think. So, but the virtual bars there, don't just leave straight away. let's have a proper discussion about this stuff, because I really do think it's important, really, really important.
Yeah. Wim, thank you very much. It's a really, really fascinating talk, and as always, I learned a lot. There's one question in there that says, from Stephen says, is there a link to the Mac snapshot shell script? Can we have that? Is that possible?
I'm not sure if it is in the blog post, but other than that, no, I can send it over. It's very simple.
Oh, that would be great. Oh, we can put that up. So, are you done, Wim?
I am.
Well, many thanks again. Thanks so much for that, and thanks for coming along. I think we'll just switch to the virtual bar. So free for all, everybody. Get yourself a drink. I mean.